Marshall Carver thought she died in the fire 5 years ago, but when he burst into his own jail, she was already there, alive, armed, and unshaken. "You should have made sure I burned, Marshall," Elena Graves said, rifle steady, "because now I'm the one holding the match." She held documents that could destroy Redstone Hollow, names, evidence, blood-stained lies. Just as truth hit the air, Victor Langston's hired guns kicked in the door. "If anyone walks out alive," she warned, "it won't be the ones who lit the fire." What followed wasn't justice. It was war. A town built on ash was about to face the flames again. The widow had returned, not for revenge, but for reckoning. And by sunrise, Redstone Hollow would never be the same. 5 years ago, the Graves homestead stood like a promise against the dusty horizon, sturdy, proud, carved from sweat and integrity. Matthew Graves wasn't the richest man in Redstone Hollow, nor the loudest, but he was respected. A man who shook hands with honesty and stared down anyone who tried to steal from him, and that made him dangerous. Dangerous to Victor Langston, the wealthiest man in the territory. Langston wore his money like armor and wielded ambition like a blade. He had one vision, a railroad that would cut straight through the hollow, turning wilderness into empire. There was just one problem. The Graves homestead sat directly in his way. Matthew had recently made a discovery: copper veins deep beneath his land. Thick, pure, more valuable than even the rail itself. He was preparing to file the mineral rights with the land office. If he succeeded, he'd become untouchable. Langston couldn't allow that. So he did what men like him always do. He bought silence. He paid for influence. He whispered rumors into the right ears. Marshall Royce Carver, once an honest lawman, was one of those ears. So was Clayton Briggs, a bitter rancher with more empty whiskey bottles than cattle. They painted Matthew as a criminal, said he was harboring fugitives, said the Graves were refusing legal eviction. Papers were signed behind closed doors. Witnesses were bought. And then came the fire. One stormy night, under the crack of thunder and cover of law, Langston's men rode in with torches. No trial, no warning. Flames devoured the house like it had been soaked in sin. Matthew died trying to save the ledgers, the documents that proved everything. Elena Graves, his wife, vanished in the chaos. The townspeople said she burned with the rest of it. Some even pitied her. Most just moved on. Langston took the land. Briggs told the tale in bars. Carver signed the final deed with shaking hands. Redstone Hollow slept, thinking the past was buried. But fire doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it purifies. Sometimes it forges something harder than steel. And somewhere beyond the hills, beneath stars that never blink, a burned and broken woman began to rise. Elena Graves should have died that night. The flames that consumed her home devoured more than wood and memory. They took her husband, her future, her place in the world. When the support beams cracked and the roof collapsed, she was thrown into the cellar by a blast of heat and falling timber. Her screams were lost beneath the roar of fire and the thunder rolling overhead. But fate, if such a thing exists, had other plans. Days later, she was pulled from the smoking earth by Naya Windwalker, a Comanche woman who lived far from the white man's towns. Naya didn't ask questions. She simply wrapped the bleeding woman in buffalo hide, smeared salves made of crushed bark and bear fat on her wounds, and carried her into the wilderness. Elena drifted in and out of consciousness for weeks. Fever burned hotter than the fire. Her body was broken, blistered, and raw. Her left cheek was split with jagged burns. Her hair had burned away in places. Her right hand trembled with every breath. But slowly she healed. In a narrow canyon choked with juniper and shadow, Naya taught her how to live again, not as a wife or a rancher's widow, but as a creature reborn. She learned how to track deer by a broken twig, how to set snares without leaving scent, how to move without making a sound. Naya spoke little English, but she spoke survival. Patience became a kind of religion. Vengeance, a slow-burning coal she kept deep inside. Nights were the worst. That was when the screams came back, when she remembered the way Matthew clawed through the smoke for her, when she saw the gleam of torchlight through the cracks in the floorboards, When she remembered Victor Langston's men laughing outside while everything burned. And then the lies came. Elena heard the rumors when she snuck into town for supplies. They said Matthew started the fire himself, that the Graves were thieves, that Marshal Royce Carver had tried to stop it, had even tried to save her. Clayton Briggs told the story best, slurring it to anyone who'd buy him a drink. Elena listened, watched. She didn't flinch when her name was spat like poison. She didn't scream when she saw her land fenced off, claimed by Langston's railroad syndicate. Instead, she bought a notebook. She wrote down every name, every habit, every lie told and who told it. She sketched maps of the town, marked back alleys and meeting spots. She followed Langston's associates. She counted shipments. She logged signatures. This wasn't revenge. This was justice, with ink and observation. She wasn't a widow anymore. She was a witness. And Redstone Hollow had no idea that the woman it thought dead was watching, waiting, with truth sharp enough to cut through any lie. She wasn't back for vengeance. She was back with proof. No one noticed when Clayton Briggs's whiskey bottle was switched. The bartender had stepped into the back just long enough for a gloved hand to place something new behind the bar. It looked the same. Same dusty glass, same half-peeled label, same cheap burn that a man like Clayton never questioned. Elena Graves sat across from him in the far corner of the Iron Horse Saloon, her face cloaked beneath the wide brim of her black hat. To the drunken regulars, she was just another widow drowning sorrow. To Clayton, she was a stranger, until the light from the kerosene lamp danced across the old burn scar on her cheek. That scar caught his memory like a match to dry kindling, but by then it was too late. The poison wasn't meant to kill. That would have been too quick, too merciful. It was something slower, a paralytic brewed from roots and bitter herbs, taught to her by Nia Windwalker herself. Just enough to numb his legs, blur his vision, and leave his heart thumping in helpless terror. Clayton's eyelids fluttered. His hand trembled around the glass. The saloon blurred and tilted. He tried to speak, but the words tangled on his tongue. Elena leaned forward, calm as the storm before a shot. She reached into her coat and placed something on the table between them. A blackened piece of wood, splintered and scarred. The faint outline of a letter still burned into it. The letter G. She tapped it once with a gloved finger. "Graves," she whispered, her voice like a knife dragged slow across old wood. Clayton's pupils dilated, his jaw slackened. He remembered. He remembered the fire, the way Matthew screamed from inside the collapsing house. He remembered the heat, the smoke, the lies they told the sheriff. He remembered the sound of Elena's voice, or what he thought was her final cry. And now he couldn't beg, couldn't run, couldn't even stand. He could only sit there, trapped in his own body, while the woman he left for dead watched him sink into the very fear he helped create. Outside, the saloon buzzed with laughter. Inside, judgment had already begun. "Elena Graves died in that fire," Clayton Briggs muttered, his voice dry and distant, like ash on the wind. Across the table, Elena didn't blink. Her eyes remained steady beneath the shadow of her black hat, the scar on her cheek now fully visible in the flickering lamplight. "People believe a lot of things," she said quietly. "Most of them lies." She reached into her coat and pulled out a worn, leather-bound notebook, its edges frayed, its cover blackened by age and soot. She laid it gently on the table like a sacred object. When she opened it, the pages rustled with purpose. There it was, Clayton's name, written in ink, underlined, and now crossed out. Below it, times, locations, bribes accepted, names of men he helped Langston hire, a lifetime of sin, methodically recorded. Clayton blinked, sweat pooling at his collar despite the chill in the air. Outside, to the casual onlooker, it looked like a woman helping a drunk man to his feet, a good Samaritan guiding a friend home. But once they reached the alley, everything changed. Her grip tightened around his arm like a steel vise. Without a word, she slammed him against the brick wall, and he collapsed like a rag doll, his limbs too numb to fight back. "You laughed," she said softly, her lips close to his ear, "while we burned." There was no rage in her tone, no hysteria, just ice. Clayton's breath grew ragged. His eyes darted, desperate for help. And then he heard it. Footsteps, boot heels against wet stone, the metallic clink of a badge. Another ghost. Marshal Royce Carver stepped into the mouth of the alley, flanked by two deputies. His once black hair was streaked with gray now, and his gut sagged over his belt. But his eyes hadn't changed. They still held that same calculating cold. His gaze swept over the scene. A paralyzed Clayton slumped against the wall, and a woman cloaked in black standing over him like judgment made flesh. Carver squinted. Elena? He breathed, hand drifting toward his pistol. That name hadn't been spoken in 5 years. Not in Redstone Hollow, not aloud, because Elena Graves was supposed to be a ghost. But now she stood before him, alive, armed, and unafraid. The fire hadn't taken her. It had forged her. Marshal Royce Carver stepped into the alley, drawn by reports of a disturbance. He froze when he saw her. Elena, he breathed. The name hit him like a bullet. She stepped from the shadows, rifle in hand, her face half scarred but fully unafraid. You watched him die, she said. You let them burn us. Elena, it wasn't that simple. No, she said, raising her voice. You made it simple when you signed the orders. When you cashed Langston's gold. A shot rang out behind him. One of his deputies collapsed, a knife in his throat. The other panicked, fired into the dark. By the time Carver turned back, Elena was gone. Only her words remained. You weren't just complicit, Royce. You were the shield that made it all look clean. He turned. Nothing. Only shadows shifting. He fired. Once. Twice. Bullets slammed into crates, wood splintered, rats scattered. Silence. Breathing heavy, Carver lowered his gun. Then something moved behind him. He spun, fast, but saw nothing. Just the corpse of his deputy, bleeding into the cobblestones. He was losing control, and for a man like Carver, that was worse than death. Come out, he shouted. We'll talk. You want justice? I'll give you a fair hearing. A low laugh echoed around him. You had your chance. 5 years ago. Then silence again, the kind that creeps up your spine. Elena Graves was no longer hiding. She was haunting, and Carver knew now. He wasn't hunting her. He was being hunted. Marshal Royce Carver stumbled through the muddy streets of Redstone Hollow, heart pounding, pistol clenched tight in his shaking hand. Behind him, the alley still echoed with the gunfire and screams. One deputy dead, the other missing. Shadows haunted every corner now, and worse, so did guilt. He needed to think, to regroup, to plan. The jailhouse was his sanctuary, his fortress, his seat of law. But when he burst through the door, breathless and sweating, she was already there. Elena Graves sat inside the open cell like it was a throne, calm, unbothered. A Winchester rifle rested casually across her lap, fingers curled around the stock like it was part of her body. He froze. Elena, he whispered. She tossed the document case at his feet. Go on, open it. He knelt and opened it with shaking hands. Inside were mineral rights, surveys, maps, all signed by Matthew Graves days before the fire. This is everything Langston killed him for, she said. I was just the law. No, she snapped. You were the mask that made murder look like justice. She leveled the rifle at him. You said we were criminals. You said I burned. Her voice faltered, just once. You lied, and they believed you. He tried to stand, but she leveled the rifle at his chest. Don't, she warned. Outside, thunder cracked across the sky. A storm was rolling in. The wind howled through the streets, rattling signs and slamming shutters. Inside the jail, silence, but not peace, because truth had finally come home, and it wasn't knocking. It had broken the door wide open. The front door of the jail creaked open slowly, and in stepped Victor Langston. He wore a tailored gray suit that gleamed under the lantern light, a silk cravat pinned with a ruby the size of a thumbnail. His boots clicked against the stone floor like punctuation, sharp and final. 4 men followed behind him, each one quiet, lean, and deadly. They weren't local deputies. These were professionals, mercenaries, killers. Langston's lips curled into a smirk when he saw Marshal Carver slumped on the floor, defeated. But his eyes, gray calculating, landed on Elena Graves like a hawk sighting prey. Well, well, he drawled. The dead really do rise. You should have stayed buried, Elena. Would have saved everyone a lot of trouble. Elena didn't flinch. She stood behind the jail desk, rifle still warm from the last confrontation. Her coat was dusted with powder, her cheeks smeared with soot and sweat, but her spine was straight as steel. I came to finish what you started, she said. Except this time, I brought receipts. She reached under the desk and threw a folder at his feet. The pages inside spilled across the floor. Forged land deeds, railroad bribe contracts, eyewitness testimonies signed by former employees, ranchers, and townspeople. Everything she'd collected over 5 years. A paper trail soaked in blood and greed. Langston's smirk faded. You think this changes anything? He said, snapping his fingers. The four gunmen raised their rifles in unison. But Elena didn't move. She gave a small whistle, soft, barely audible. And then, outside the jail, the world lit up. Dozens of torches ignited across Redstone Hollow. Townsfolk poured into the streets. Men, women, even children, whispering, watching, armed with pitchforks, rifles, tools, anything they could carry. Justice had been whispered about long enough. Tonight it screamed. Inside the cell, Clayton Briggs, still half paralyzed from the poison, groaned. His eyes fluttered open. Elena glanced at him, just once. And Briggs, with what little strength he had left, reached for Carver's drop shotgun. His hand shook, but his aim didn't. He pulled the trigger. Boom! One of Langston's men went down in a spray of blood and dust. Langston turned with a curse and fired a single bullet into Briggs's chest. The old drunk gasped, slumped back, and didn't rise again. Elena moved. Gunfire exploded in the confined space. Glass shattered. Plaster cracked. Screams echoed down the street. Elena dove behind Carver's desk, returning fire with precision. She wasn't just shooting wildly. She was hunting. Calculated. Cold. For every round she fired, a mercenary returned one. Splinters flew as the jail was torn apart. One of Langston's men tried to flank her, but she caught his shadow and fired through the wall, dropping him where he stood. Carver crawled toward the corner, dragging himself away from the line of fire, his face pale and slick with sweat. He didn't reach for his weapon. He knew this wasn't his fight anymore. It never had been. Elena popped up from behind the desk, emptied her revolver into a third mercenary, then rolled to reload. Her movements were practiced. Sharp. She'd been preparing for this moment longer than any of them had been alive. The last gunman lunged, but too slow. She spun and fired point blank into his chest. He dropped. Now only Langston remained, his suit torn, his face bloodied, the ruby pin gone. His pistol trembled in his hand. And then the door behind him creaked open again. The townspeople had arrived. They flooded the jail like a rising tide. Silent, wide-eyed, armed. Langston looked around, cornered for the first time in his gilded life. He sank to his knees. As the rope was tightened, a voice rose from the crowd. "Wait!" cried Mr. Talbot, the town's aging shopkeeper. "I lost my son in that fire, but even he would have wanted a fair trial." The townspeople hesitated. Murmurs rippled. Pitchforks dipped. Elena turned to face him. "Langston gave no trials. He gave fire." Talbot shook his head. "And if we become him, what makes us different?" Someone whispered, "Justice." Another said, "Vengeance." The line blurred like smoke, but the rope stayed. That night, two men swung from the tree, and long after the town argued whether they'd seen justice, or simply the last act in a long, bitter revenge. Outside, Redstone Hollow burned, not with fire, but with truth. Everything Victor Langston had built, his fortune, his power, his illusion of control, was crumbling. Right here in the very jail where he'd signed away the Graves land and sealed Matthew's death. Elena stood over him, gun still smoking. He looked up at her, chest heaving. "You don't have to do this," he whispered. But she wasn't listening anymore. She turned to the townspeople and gave them the choice. Elena Graves didn't pull the trigger. She didn't have to. The moment Victor Langston fell to his knees, bloodied and broken, and Marshal Royce Carver sat slumped in the corner like a discarded badge, the power shifted. Not to Elena, not to any one person, but to the people of Redstone Hollow. She turned to face them. Dozens of faces illuminated by the soft flicker of torchlight. Farmers, storekeepers, widows, orphans. Folks who had swallowed the lies for years because they trusted the law, trusted the wealth, trusted the names carved on brass plaques and saloon doors. Not anymore. She raised her voice. Not shouting, but strong, clear, unwavering. These men lied to you, she said. They murdered in your name. They stole from your neighbors, your children, your future, and they made you accomplices to their greed. A hush fell over the jail. No one spoke. Because deep down, everyone knew it was true. The ledgers were real, the contracts, the testimonies, and so were the graves left behind. There was no need for trial, no need for delay. Justice had waited 5 long years. It would wait no more. 2 men were dragged from the wreckage of the jailhouse. Langston still protested, crying out for fairness, for civility, for mercy. Carver said nothing, too hollow to fight back. The crowd marched in silence to the edge of town. There beneath the old hanging oak, the very tree used long ago for frontier justice, 2 ropes waited. Elena didn't follow them. She stayed behind, beneath the swinging lantern on the porch of the jail, watching, but not partaking. The flames in her chest had dimmed to embers. The storm in her heart had begun to settle. And by the time dawn broke across the horizon, streaking the sky in copper and rose, 2 shadows swayed from the oak's wide arms. No speeches were made, no songs were sung, just the creak of rope and the soft murmur of wind through grass. Justice in Redstone Hollow didn't come in a courtroom. It came in silence, in the stillness after the screaming stops. No ceremony, no mercy, just reckoning. And in that reckoning, something fragile was restored. Not vengeance, but truth. Elena Graves didn't stay to celebrate. There were no cheers for her, no parades, no medals. Justice had been delivered, yes, but not the kind that left anyone feeling triumphant. Redstone Hollow was quieter than it had ever been, like the entire town was holding its breath in the wake of what had passed. She walked the streets one final time, past the saloon where Clayton Briggs once laughed about the fire, past the jailhouse, now scarred with bullet holes and bloodstains, past the gravesite where they finally laid Matthew Graves to rest, under a proper marker, no longer a ghost buried beneath lies. She didn't speak to anyone, and no one dared stop her. What do you say to a woman who rose from the fire and brought justice with her? She wasn't looking for peace. She wasn't expecting it. The fire that had taken Matthew still burned inside her. Some wounds don't heal, some ghosts don't fade. But the truth was out. Her husband's name was clean, her land no longer stained by forged deeds and bribes. The corruption that ruled the town had been gutted at the root. And Elena? Elena was free. What she did next, no one can say for certain. Some claim she became a bounty hunter, chasing down the wicked in border towns and badlands. Men who thought their gold could shield them from consequence. Others say she rode north into the high mountains, vanishing into the snow like smoke, hunting the last of those who escaped her wrath. But whether she vanished or lived on, her legend remained. Every town west of the Hollow knows the story of the widow in black, the woman who walked out of the flames, the woman who stared down killers and cowards alike, the woman who buried truth in ink and then carved it in blood. Some say she was a spirit, a ghost. Others say she was just a woman, scarred, grieving, unstoppable. But when the wind howls through a dying town and the guilty feel their past creeping close, they whisper her name and pray she doesn't return. Because Elena Graves didn't just survive. She made sure they remembered why they tried to kill her. She rose from ashes and returned fire for fire. In a world so quick to move on, Elena Graves reminds us, truth doesn't vanish, it waits. And sometimes it only takes one voice, steady and brave, to bring it roaring back. This story isn't just about revenge. It's about standing up when no one else will. About the weight of silence and the power of remembering. Even today, when power still buys silence and wealth still writes the headlines, the spirit of Redstone Hollow speaks to us all. How often do we look away, telling ourselves, "It's not my fight," How often do we doubt someone's truth just because it's inconvenient? And maybe most of all, how many Elenas walk among us today, quietly keeping records, watching, waiting for their moment to rise? Justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears scars, and sometimes the people we think are gone are simply gathering strength. We want to hear from you. Do you think Elena was right to let the town decide? Was vigilante justice the only way? Or is there always another path? Have you ever witnessed a moment where the truth finally came to light, years after everyone gave up? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to know how this story resonated with you. Thank you for walking with us through this story of fire, truth, and redemption. If it stirred something in you, made you feel, reflect, or remember, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and ring that bell. And maybe, just maybe, one of them is yours. Stories of courage, justice, and the people who refuse to be forgotten. Because stories like Elena's remind us, the past may burn, but the truth never truly dies.